Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Akinwolere. It's less than a month until the January transfer window opens. So, with Wharton, Anderson and Baleba on Manchester United's radar, will they finally fix their midfield in 2026? All right, in for this one, we've got Laurie Whitwell. We've also got Mark Critchley as well. Gents, 13 games into the season and we're already talking January transfers. Look, I'm trying to gauge this one. Is this going to be a big window for clubs, do you reckon? Are we looking forward to it? Are we excited?
This is the business we're in, right, Ayo? We write about football and it has a funny way of bringing interesting stories to us via the transfer market. And it feels very, very early to be getting into the weeds of this. But then again, I suppose these are the kind of weeks and days where clubs will be making those kind of calls ahead of January. Personally, from a Manchester United point of view, clearly they could do with strengthening, but I don't think they see January as an ideal opportunity to do that. Then again, if something comes onto the landscape, then they could act quickly, I suppose. But from my understanding, it was kind of be loan in or loan out, that kind of thing. And I wonder if that's the kind of case for most clubs across the Premier League. I suppose it just depends on each individual objective for the end of the season. If they can do something in January that helps them get there, avoid relegation, for example, or really push on to try and win the title, or qualify for the Champions League places. I think that's maybe where we will see some action. But I don't go into this one thinking that it's going to be loads of huge amount of spend going on and loads of incredible stories happening.
We need to talk about Manchester United, Laurie. You've written in today's deal sheet on The Athletic that a midfielder is high on the club's wish list. Now, you've also said that they might probably not pay big money in January, but tell us more about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that clearly they looked at in the summer. It's a real issue at United since, I say Michael Carrick left the club in 2018, although he was at the tail end of his career then, so perhaps even before that. And you obviously go back to Roy Keane, absolutely bossing Manchester United midfield. And they haven't really ever had a midfield that you would say expresses strength and, is the real heart of the team since that point, because you've had Bruno Fernandes as the number 10 and now he's sort of being co-opted into a deeper position. We've had the change of formation under Ruben Amorim. Casemiro they spent big money on, but that was a kind of late window arrival after the failed pursuit of Frenkie de Jong, who was intended to be that player that they could bring in and be the heartbeat of the club for several seasons. So it's been an issue for many, many campaigns. And they even looked at it in the summer, didn't they? Carlos Baleba, they had talks over whether they could sign him. I think Ruben Amorim was, very on board with that kind of signing. In the end, they went for Benjamin Sesko up top. They went for a striker instead. And I think they thought that adding goals to the team was what they needed to do. Now, clearly then the midfield comes even higher on the agenda as we go into January and then into the summer market in 2026. And they've got some options, it feels like, that there's quite a few players that are showing themselves to be worthy of maybe making that step up. Obviously, no disrespect to the clubs they're currently at, and particularly Nottingham Forest when we get on to Elliot Anderson. They're in Europe and United aren't. So, who are United to say, come and join us immediately? But I certainly think that, United would present a very appealing proposition to these players that we're talking about. Although Adam Wharton as well, Crystal Palace, they're in Europe and United aren't. And it's been interesting that you've had Baleba, Wharton, Anderson all play against United in recent weeks and kind of, make their cases to different degrees. It's funny that Baleba was the player that United obviously, progressed to a degree with. I mean, in the end, what happened was they had agents sort of acting on behalf of the player, looking at and the clubs, to be fair, are looking at the potential cost of a deal. Personal terms weren't a problem. I think Baleba was certainly up for the move, but in the end, Brighton were resolute in their demand for, or at least their insistence. I don't think they ever set a price, but they wanted in the region of a Moises Caicedo type transfer, and United had kind of entered those discussions on the basis that maybe it would be a João Pedro type transfer fee, 60, 70 million, not in excess of 100 million. And when it became clear, they withdrew from the conversation and made a direct call, sort of executive to communicate that. Now, Baleba's form since that point hasn't been great.
Has it?
Yeah, taken off at halftime, I think, in 4 Premier League matches, which is quite striking, really. Now, does that dissuade United from still going for him again? Or does that actually mean to Brighton, well, the price perhaps, won't be as high as what we thought it would be? It's a really fascinating one. That was certainly one of the points that somebody made to me during the summer, that, for all that Brighton are saying, well, he's 21, he's had 2 really successful seasons, he'll have a load of clubs in for him next summer. His trajectory is upwards. He's got a long contract, so all those aspects that would protect a player's value, that might have still been the best time to sell him because he was on that, upward curve, and you don't know what's going to happen in future. So that's an interesting sort of dynamic to sort of throw into the mix on it. But yeah, I mean, I certainly think Elliot Anderson really impressed when he played for Forest against United. He had a brilliant start to season playing for England as well. He looks the kind of primary focus, it seems to me, at the moment. But then you've got Adam Wharton, who is a different kind of midfielder.
Definitely.
And yeah, so I don't know. I just think it's going to be one of the fascinating stories this year. Okay, maybe not January, but as I say, you had that caveat in to sort of say, if something does arise, teams, certainly United, have shown under Sir Jim Ratcliffe a desire to act quicker than perhaps previous regimes. But I think it's certainly going to be United's midfield pursuit is going to be one of the intriguing stories in 2026.
Yeah, I mean, big names there: Wharton, Baleba, Anderson, Mark. I mean, in your dream world, who do United need out of that list? But also, are United the desired destination for that threesome we're looking at here?
Well, look, I think each of them, from a United perspective, have been flavour of the month at one time or another over the past year or the past 18 months. If you remember when Wharton came in and really adapted to the Premier League brilliantly at the start of last season, people were talking about him as being the next potential midfield target. Obviously, there was the interest with Baleba over the summer, and so he was getting attention then. And as Laurie says, I think since Elliot Anderson had his England call up this year, everyone's sat up and taken notice at exactly the sort of player that he is as well. I think they're 3 very different players. Wharton, he likes to pop passes in between the lines. He perhaps, if you're going to criticise him for one thing, he perhaps doesn't have the engine of somebody like Anderson, but he can still be quite devastating, as he was in the first half against United at Selhurst Park on Sunday. Baleba's more of your typical number 6, maybe not necessarily going to create a ton, but he's going to give you that solidity and that security in the middle of the park. And then Anderson, I personally, if you're asking me to pick one, if you're asking for my personal preference,
we are,
Come on, we are. I mean, you've got around the houses, mate. Just let us know.
Actually, it was this before Baleba and Wharton and all them. I love Elliot Anderson. Last season...
Oh, well, you're saying you were day one on Elliot Anderson.
Okay. Day one.
It's easy to say that now, mate. It's easy to say that now.
Like your favourite band, we're all catching up now, are we? Okay.
I bought Elliot Anderson's first album, guys, so don't. I didn't see you there. I didn't see you in line for it. No, but I think Forest last season, obviously, it's not like he was an unknown quantity. He was playing regularly for Forest last season, and they were challenging for a Champions League place. But I thought he was excellent then, and he was showing everything that he's shown this season. And obviously, we've seen it with players before. Once you get a little bit of international recognition, particularly an England call up, then there's a lot more attention and focus on your name. And it was the same case with Wharton, right, when he went to the Euros in 2024. So I don't think you could. Any one of them would improve United's midfield options at the minute, and also they're also young that you would be looking at them to be a mainstay in that midfield for 5, 6, 7, 8 years time as well. And that's the thing about them. But that is why they're going to cost so much money. It's also why all 3 of them are highly admired by Premier League rivals, as you were mentioning there. And I think that it's. United still has this huge draw for players. The stature of the club, the history of it. We're still of a generation, I think, where a lot of these players would have grown up watching, if not the 99 team, as perhaps my generation did, then certainly the 08 team and Ronaldo and Rooney and Tevez, etc. So there's still a lot of affinity that players have and a lot of respect players have for the club. But it hasn't been the best of times over the past 10 years, and that sort of weighs in the factor as well. And you'd look at the team at the moment and you say, yes, maybe perhaps there's progress there, but it's still the future's very uncertain. So there'll be a lot of suitors for them.
Okay, who's in charge of recruitment now, Laurie? Because, this is something that has been a bit weird for Manchester United over the last few years. You think about the money spent on players like Anthony, Jadon Sancho, those players who aren't even at Manchester United anymore. Are they thinking about this moving forward? Because it's super, super crucial as the team is trying to change its fortunes.
Yeah, I mean, it's you make a great point on those 2 players, for example, came in for a lot of money, 86 million, I think Anthony, 70 odd million for Sancho. And you just think if you could sign a midfielder for that kind of money, you'd be getting a very good midfielder and they could really transform the club, the team. So, yeah, I think if they can get this right, it could be crucial. And so, yeah, who are the people that are actually making that call? Clearly Ruben Amorim will have a say as head coach, but he works sort of, in tune with Jason Wilcox, who's the director of football, who is the guy who, watches training. He kind of, I guess, guides the whole sporting direction of the club, and he will certainly have an influential voice on this. But also Chief Executive Omar Barada, he gets involved in this kind of thing. And then you've got, in terms of the recruitment team, actually a bit of a change. I mean, it's been going through a lot of change, the recruitment department, since Sir Jim Ratcliffe made his investment. Basically everybody that was there before in this kind of area has gone, apart from Director of Negotiations Matt Hargreaves. He's the guy that he was appointed a few years ago, and he will go and speak to the sporting director, speak to the agents, and kind of assess the landscape, the market value for things, and make these kind of more finer negotiations as they go on. But you've got Christopher Vavell, who is the director of recruitment, and then they've made an appointment, or they're making an appointment just below him. So the head of scouting, senior scouting, is going to be a guy called Kyle McCauley. Now this is a role that they've been looking for since the summer. Really, it's quite a competitive process, I'm told. And McCauley basically has followed Graham Potter. He's got a close relationship with him, so he was with him at Östersunds, when they had that incredible run from like the fourth tier of Swedish football into Europa League last 32, I think it was, losing to Arsenal. And then he's gone to Swansea and Brighton and Chelsea and West Ham. And he's had different roles at these clubs, but all in terms of analyst kind of type roles and sort of scouting roles. So I think he comes with a good pedigree from people that I've spoken to. They think he does a good blend of data and, sort of networking. So yeah, they're making this appointment. So I think he's going to be kind of overseeing the scouts and making recommendations himself. So he's going to have a voice on this. But yeah, Vavell's an important figure as well above him. And then ultimately you've got the co-owners at the top of the club. You've got Ratcliffe, who certainly has, he's kept abreast of these kind of things. He's across it, in terms of the spending. He will have these kind of conversations we've seen in public. He'll make his opinions on certain players. And then the Glazers as well, they have, they're still the majority owners. So if it gets to a price point that, it is something that they have to consider on a financial terms, in terms of whether they can afford it or PSR calculations, and certainly the Glazers will be involved in that. So a lot of voices.
Yeah, I mean, Kobbie Mainoo one is the one, Critch, and I do wonder what this young man has to do to break into this squad, and what this young man has to think if Manchester United are on the hunt for a midfielder. I mean, what is going on there, man?
It's been a consistent theme for almost a whole year now, to be honest. When Ruben Amorim first came in, Kobbie Mainoo, he was injured at the very start, but once he got fit again, he was starting regularly. He was playing as one of those two in midfield in the 3-4-3, usually alongside Manuel Ugarte. But I always remember, and it's a game we talk about a lot, but I always remember the defeat against Brighton back in January, where he started that day up against Baleba, as it so happens. But after that, we just didn't really see him there again. Now, we did have an injury short about a month or so afterwards, but it was after that Brighton game in January where Amorim started trying him as a number 10. I remember being in Bucharest against FCSB, I should say, actually. And he was trying him in that position, then again against Crystal Palace the following week. He hasn't really started a Premier League game in midfield since then, or at least a Premier League game of much importance, apart from when they were rotating between the Europa League, the very important Europa League games at the end of last season. So that's since then, and then you're talking since the start of this season, he hasn't started a Premier League game whatsoever, whether it's as a number 10 or in midfield or wherever it is. Now, this was clearly it was a hot topic coming into the season, and once it became clear after the first couple of games that he wasn't in this starting 11, then questions were being asked. You might remember that we reported on The Athletic towards the end of the summer window that he'd asked for a loan move, because I think Mainoo knew himself that he wasn't going to get the minutes that he needed if he wants to be part of the World Cup squad, obviously, and regain his place for England, having played in the Euro 2024 final. But he didn't get that loan move, and he hasn't had the opportunity since then either. Really, he has come on in games, but he hasn't had those regular minutes. Now, when you ask Amorim about this, he says that he's fighting for a position like anybody else is, much like Casemiro was at the very start of Amorim's reign, when he wasn't getting a look and he was behind even Toby Collier in the pecking order. But he worked hard on the training ground at Carrington, impressed, and got back into the team, and now it feels like he's one of the first names on the team sheet. Now, that goes to show that you can turn things around and you can work your way back into this manager's thoughts. Clearly you can, but Mainoo hasn't been able to do that just yet. And I think that does, there's been concerns about his athleticism, I think, about his mobility. These positions in Amorim's system, they require you to cover so much ground because you're 2 in midfield, often up against 3 in midfield. You need to do the work both at the back of the pitch in possession and then at the top of the pitch as well, pressing. You need to do everything. And I think there's just a little bit of I don't know if it's a concern, but there's a little bit of a question mark over whether Mainoo's got that to his game, and maybe that's held him back a little bit. You're at the point now where you're going into a January transfer window. Again, he hasn't started in the league this season. It was only at Grimsby that he started in the League Cup. He needs minutes. And so I think Laurie's right that it's going to be a hot topic going into the January window. Could they revisit a loan again? We'll see. It would perhaps work best for all parties because then at least you're coming out of the situation perhaps in summer where he's got some minutes under his belt. Maybe he's improved as a player and maybe there's a future for him. But his whole situation at the moment is very uncertain simply because he doesn't get the minutes that he needs.
All right, gents, quiz time. Laurie, well, I want to test your midfield knowledge and you, Critch, as well. So here we go. Can you name Manchester United's last 10 midfield signings? So that's defensive and attacking and also central midfielders. And this are including loans as well. So off you go.
Ugarte.
Yes, get in there, Critch.
I'd even forgotten about him, to be honest.
You already mentioned him. How'd you forget it so quickly?
Fall at the first hurdle. Casemiro?
Yeah, go on. Yeah.
But are we going chronologically here? Because I don't think
No. Just throw it in. Just throw it in.
Okay.
I can't be harsh there. That'd be too harsh.
You've already thought of one that I've missed then, have you?
So Amrabat would count.
Yes, mate, that's a really good one.
Amrabat's a good one.
So, okay. Well, so over to you, Laurie.
Well, I'm now thinking like I can't get my head off Ander Herrera, but is that like way beyond last 10?
That's way beyond. That's way beyond that 10.
Carrick was still at the club.
Yeah,
right?
exactly,
So, yeah.
exactly.
Right.
Come on, one from Chelsea. Come on, he played. Played
Matic?
recently. Yes.
Is he just in?
There's another Chelsea one in there as well. So obvious. It could be any midfield. It could be attacking. Could be defensive. Could be central.
Okay, well let's Bruno Fernandes.
Yeah, mate. Perfect.
Paul Pogba.
No.
Another midfielder from Chelsea.
Yeah. Okay.
Not Mata. He was before Matic, wasn't he?
No, he was before. Yeah, he was before.
He scored a free kick the weekend.
Oh, Mason Mount.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Are you?
He's in the front three. This shouldn't be allowed.
Is that because he's been played in a different position? Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, one from Brentford.
Christian Eriksen.
There we go. Perfect.
Right,
one from Bayern Munich. Loan from Bayern Munich. Now plays for Dortmund. Yes, there we go. Another one, Ajax.
Donny van der Beek.
There we go.
Donny.
And now this one is a beauty because he was like my low-key guilty pleasure for Manchester United. Came from Shakhtar.
Fred. I said him just there. Fred.
There we go. It took you a while, gents.
I can't believe I didn't go straight to Mason Mount.
I'm telling you, we know who the real journalist is here, gents. It would be Mark Critchley. So thank you once again, Critchley, for proving your credentials. Nice one. Right, let's move on because both of you were on the podcast after the win at Anfield a few weeks ago, and we spoke about the need for consistency. And actually, since then, Manchester United have beaten Brighton and Palace and also drawn against Forest and Spurs. They lost to 10-man Everton, but let's say that's a bit of a blip. But, how do you both cope with the ups and downs of talking about Manchester United? I think about it from a fan's perspective, but from a journalistic perspective, I know it gives the juice. But, I mean, what is it like watching this team being so inconsistent?
It does make you just consider your opinions carefully before expressing them. So I certainly have had strong feelings whilst watching the football matches, particularly if I'm with my friends and I'm kind of not quite in the journalistic mode. But it does mean if you know that they could, kind of spring a surprise next week. You kind of have to make sure that you're not going too hard, I think. And maybe people don't like that. They'll think that, okay, you're sitting on the fence there. And listen, I do have splinters on my bum from, numerous cases of not quite committing myself. But I think that it just shows that you've got to kind of, try and take a long-term view and appreciate there's going to be ups and downs with this system, with this manager, with these players. That being said, there's going to come a point, right, where it has to be, better. It has to be more consistent because of the scale of the club, because of the money they've spent, and that will continue to do so. So, but it does. I mean, the Jekyll and Hyde nature. I mean, Palace wasn't even better really. Certainly the first half. It's just that then I think Palace tired and United were good with those two set pieces. Yeah, it's not like this was then suddenly a total reversal. Although they showed resilience and they showed some combative spirit in that second half. But yeah, the Everton result was just so bad considering they were against 10 men. They just had to win that game. Probably regardless of the man sending off. Just if they had real designs on actually pushing into the Champions League places. But it is. I don't know about you, Critch, but I do feel there's some kind of emotional drain that goes on throughout the weeks, throughout the turbulence.
There's definitely an emotional drain. I can empathise with that 100%. I would say that the past 2.5 years have been different from the rest of my experience of covering the club, particularly last season and the season before it. I think it felt like the team just wasn't performing at a level that it should be, and there was a lot of other noise and a lot of other things going on off the pitch that weren't even that related to whether it was the takeover or whether it was the situation with certain players. There was a lot of noise around the club, and that made it difficult at the same time. But just in terms of the on the pitch stuff, having come out of those 2 seasons into this one, I find this season slightly more difficult to cover because I feel like or certainly in terms of analysing the performances, I think, because you look at this United team now, they're 4 points off second place at the minute in the table before this round of midweek games. They're 4 points off 15th. So any 2 games, any 2 results that go the wrong way or the right way, they could be soaring and everyone thinks, Champions League title challenge maybe, whoa. Or it's back to the depths that they were at last season. They're almost slap bang in the middle of these 2 positions. And you don't know what United side was going to turn up on any given weekend, sometimes any given half. But I also feel at the same time, and this is maybe the strongest thing that they've got going for them, is that you can say that about just about every other team in the league, apart from the ones that we think are pretty certain to be in a relegation battle, and Arsenal, who look like likely champions at the moment. Everybody else, it's all a much of a muchness, and United are right bang in the middle of that. And so I think you've got to bear that in mind just after every single result. They can lose to 10-man Everton one night and then go to somewhere like Selhurst Park where Crystal Palace haven't lost in 12 games and win. And to draw any hard and fast conclusions feels difficult at the moment. And it's even more difficult because it's United and we expect there to be definitive takes on, are they good, are they not? People demand them every week, and are they back or have they turned a corner? And they turn so many corners, they've just gone in circles at the minute. But that is just this season. It's this team at this minute. They're inconsistent. They'll be inconsistent until they prove otherwise, until they can win not just 5 games in a row so that lad can have a haircut, but like 6, 7, 8, 9. That's the only time I'm going to be convinced about this United team. And it's really challenging to analyse and write about the performances at the minute because you don't know what the next one's going to be like. But at least I think it is a little bit more, there are more positive signs, I think, than there have been at times over the past 2 years. And I think that is small progress, I would say.
Well, you used the word insipid for that game against Everton. So you were very clear on what you were talking about there. But I mean, come on, talk to me about that performance and what that reflected of this Manchester United squad.
Well, I think it touched on a lot of what I was saying just there. But at the same time, my takeaway that night was that if we accept that this United team is probably going to finish somewhere between 6th, 7th and 8th, and everybody, if expectations, I think, have been lowered to that level this season, given how much turmoil there has been over the past 2 years and given the way that last season finished, if we accept that the team is going to finish at that around that level, then they're going to lose games and they're going to be on the wrong end of results like 1-0 at home to Everton. The thing about that performance, I think, was the manner in which they lost it. To be up against 10 men, to look like you could have played all night without scoring, to not score whatsoever. It just, one thing that Amorim has continually come back to is intensity. It seems to be the word that his go-to to explain any performance that isn't quite at the level that he wants. that was the case that night. It was the case also on Sunday when he was talking about how they were playing in the first half. He was saying they just lacked that intensity. And, it can feel like a little bit of an easy explanation. It's certainly not one of these hyper specific tactical explanations, right? But if United aren't operating at that level of intensity, that should be a prerequisite. That should be what's expected. They should go out there and have that level of drive and intensity to get the result over the line. And if they're failing at that, then I think there's some serious questions that have to be answered. Now, they responded on Sunday by totally turning things around in the second half, and it was a much better performance, more controlled performance as well. But the display against Everton, it just lacked any of that. They looked, frankly, quite clueless at times as to how they were going to break this 10-man team down, and that's a huge indictment. So it felt like a night where you had to be critical of the performance. You had to call it insipid. You had to call it abject. You had to use those kinds of words for it. At the same time, you're trying to remind yourself that they can play like that one week and then they can actually pull a decent result out of the bag the other, so you don't want to be too hard at the same time. But I think of any performance this season, maybe save Brentford, but then I thought it was worse than Brentford, to be honest, given the circumstances. That if there was any performance you would be critical of, it was that one last Monday night against Everton.
Yeah, Laurie, away from tactics and away from the way this team plays, you think about being a coach or a manager of a team. It's more than just that. It's about bringing a group of men together. It's about how you connect with those men. What do you think Amorim, as a coach, away from the tactics, brings to this Manchester United squad?
It's a really interesting point, because with us in the media, he is, very charming, charismatic. He definitely gives us answers to questions that we ask, even some questions that we don't ask. I mean, I think there was one answer about Patrick Dorgu at a press conference. I wasn't actually at the press conference, but the question was a pretty open one, and it kind of went quite specific on, the anxiety that he feels, that Dorgu feels whilst playing for United, which was, very pointed, and you could have easily just, not answered it in that way. So I think he kind of has this urge to be honest, to kind of, fight fire with fire. Certainly his emotional state on the touchlines you can see. Interestingly though, with the players, he doesn't really have one-on-one conversations with them. It's more, okay. It's more kind of group settings. So, I mean, the kind of famous one that I've reported on is the end of the season chat that they had before the Aston Villa game after the Europa League final, and he told Garnacho to, he better have a good agent for the summer. But within that sort of setting as well, he also had pointed criticism for Manuel Ugarte. He said his work rate wasn't, what was required, and sort of didn't remind him of their time together at Sporting, because they have worked together. So that kind of colours my answer earlier, to when you're asking about United's midfield targets. So the Ugarte question kind of comes up there, and that touches on Critchley's point there in terms of the intensity. I think that's certainly what Amorim just feels has to happen every single day at training, every single game. He shouldn't have to instill that in the players. I think this is a really interesting sort of part of football. How much comes from the players? How much should be a self-governing dressing room, and how much should be from the head coach to instill that in you? You can only say it so many times, right? And this group of players, they're only playing one time a week. They absolutely should be emptying the tank every single time, because they've got nothing else to play for. It's the Premier League, and it's trying to get back into the Champions League, which is where they all want to play. Not only for the prestige, but also for their bank balances, no doubt. So, there shouldn't be anything left, on the pitch, and that's why the Everton game, I mean, maybe they were playing too quick at times, but I don't know. I felt that there wasn't the intensity from the get-go in that game. There wasn't the kind of desire. There wasn't the purpose about them, and that's what happened really at Grimsby Town. I think they went into that game thinking it was going to be an easy game, and they weren't prepared for it. And Grimsby were at it, and so that's something that I'm kind of struggling to comprehend. Where does the responsibility for that ultimately lie?
Yeah, Critch, we do talk about the manager a lot, and I guess he's there to be scrutinised as a Manchester United manager, but should we be talking about players more as well? Because there are still a lot of those players that were there before he got there, and as Laurie says, they're not playing much more football than that once a week at the moment. The intensity, the passion, playing for the badge, Manchester United, all those things together, should they be putting that on the field?
Well, they should be, and that should be, like I said before, it should be a prerequisite. I think that I am mindful at the same time that there's one thing people say about playing for United is that the shirt hangs heavy on a lot of players, and I think we've seen that. it isn't the easiest club to play for, even when things are going well. I mean, the most immediate example that springs to mind is just from Sunday, and Lenny Yoro, who's a young defender, very highly rated, has come with a lot of excitement, a big reputation, huge potential, clearly, and I think he's been a good signing for United so far. And even I'm almost reticent to say that because I don't think you can really judge it yet, because it's a signing for many years down the line. But he's had a couple difficult weeks. He gives away the penalty on Sunday, then comes out for the second half, and he's replaced pretty soon afterwards. And he looks absolutely distraught on the bench. And it is a club that brings a level of scrutiny. I don't know if I would say like no other, but I'm struggling to think of many others that do. What, Real Madrid, Barcelona? This is it. Like, but in this country, is there really any? I don't know. How many podcasts do we do talking about how these players' performances and over analysing them and scrutinising them? It can be a real hard school to come up through, especially if you're a young player, and it hasn't worked out for others who have left the club over the last few years. But you do. At the same time, there is that expectation that you do come to every game with that level of intensity and that you are performing to your absolute best ability, because United is still seen as the pinnacle by many within football and within English football. So there is that expectation. I feel that, there's always a bit of a split between who's this on. Is it on the players? Is it on the manager? In the end, is it, people go to the Glazers, for example, the ownership. You could point fingers in many different directions for the reason why United haven't met expectations over the last 10 years. I think probably you could share the blame around, and that's fair enough. But yeah, I take the point. Look, they're playing once a week this season. You need to have that level of intensity. We've seen it most weeks, I would say, but when we haven't seen it, that's when results have faltered, and that's something that clearly needs to be addressed.
Gents, let's leave it there. Appreciate you guys joining us, Crit, also Laurie as well, and also thank you guys for watching as well. Don't forget to like the video and also comment as well. We'll be back soon. For more from the Athletic FC podcast, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. We've got top journalists like David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the entire season. Make sure you don't miss an episode of the Athletic FC. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts from.